Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're in the kitchen again today, and today we are going to make a sun-dried focaccia. This is a wonderful, delicious bread that you can serve at any family gathering, any potluck. It's excellent, and it's not so difficult to make. Now we are going to do a high hydration focaccia, which means there's going to be more water than you think there should be. Okay, the last time I made focaccia, I did a more standard hydration dough. This time, it's going to look like there's too much water. I promise there's not. So let's get started. First thing we need is 4.5 cups of flour. Just your standard all-purpose flour will do you. You can also use bread flour. To that, we are going to add 2 teaspoons of salt. Now, I'm just using a Himalayan salt, but you can use any salt that's in your cupboard. Kosher, table salt, it doesn't matter. I'm using Himalayan salt because we have a lot of Himalayan salt. I've got a kid that really likes it. So mix that in. The next thing we're going to add is 2 heaping teaspoons of yeast. I am using instant yeast, so because of that, I can just add it directly to the dough. If you are using a traditional yeast, you need to dissolve it in some water first. How much water should you dissolve it in if you're using traditional yeast? 2 cups. Sounds like a lot, but 2 cups is what you need. If you are using traditional yeast, you would take 2 cups of lukewarm water, let the yeast dissolve in that for 5 to 10 minutes, and then add that to your flour. However, I used instant yeast, so I'm just putting the 2 cups of water straight in. That looks like too much water. I know, it's not. But it looks like it is because our standard bread recipes are 3 cups of flour to 1 cup of water. And I've got 2 cups of water in here, but I don't have 6 cups of flour. That's okay. I promise it's okay. So this is not going to look right if you're not used to a high hydration dough. Okay? So this is not going to look right. But I promise it is. So you're just going to take a wooden spoon. Don't use your hands yet. This is really gooey right now because there is a lot of water. There's not too much, but there's a lot. So we are going to mix this with a wooden spoon and just kind of turn it around a few times. Don't actually knead it. You just want to get some of that flour incorporated. You won't get it all incorporated. It's not going to happen. So this is going to be a loose, shaggy dough right now. Okay? The trick to this dough is to wait. So we are going to do several resting periods. Okay? So now we're not going to need this wooden spoon anymore. So I'm just going to peel some of this dough off of my wooden spoon. Okay, we're not going to need this wooden spoon anymore. But I don't use my hands at this point because there's no point. You're not kneading. You're just kind of incorporating dough. So we're not kneading this. We don't need to. It's too high a hydration to knead. It'll just, if you start kneading this, you're just going to get it all stuck to your hands like that, but over your entire hand. It's not going to knead. So we're not kneading. We're just letting it develop. So now we're going to walk away and we are going to pop a little cover on. You don't have to do it airtight. I don't like doing these airtight, but just put a little cover on to keep the moisture in. And we're going to walk away for about 15 minutes. It's not that specific. You don't have to set a timer. If it takes you 20 minutes or 30 minutes to come back, that's okay. But at least 15 minutes, but before the hour mark. So I'm going to walk away for 15 minutes, then we'll come back and continue with our dough. All right, our dough has been resting for just over 15 minutes. We're going to uncover it. I know it still doesn't look right. It doesn't look like a workable dough because it's not yet. So now we have to perform a series of stretch and folds. It's kind of like kneading, but it's much gentler because there are air bubbles forming inside this dough and we don't want to knock all the air out. So stretch and folds are simply taking your bowl, grabbing some of your dough, and when you start doing this now, your dough is going to tear. It's not going to stretch and fold nicely. It will later. But you basically just stretch it out, fold it over itself, and give it a push. Then you quarter turn your bowl, grab the other side, stretch, pull towards you, give it a push. Turn again, stretch. You can use your second hand to hold your dough in place. Push. One last time. Stretch. Fold it over. Give it a push. Okay, so now it's starting to look a little bit more like dough. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put the cover back on, and we're going to wait at least another 15 minutes. You can set a timer, or you can just come back in 15 to 30 minutes. It's not that specific. You don't have to be exactly 15 minutes. But we're going to walk away, let that dough relax. All right, so we are back for stretch and fold number 2. See, our dough is looking like dough now. At least it's looking like something we might be able to work with. So again, we're going to do the same thing. Stretch, and it's okay to hold the dough in place because it'll always slide around. And fold. Turn. Stretch. Fold. Turn again. Stretch. Fold. One more time. Stretch. Fold. Okay? So obviously it's now looking like we can do something with it. But we're not going to do anything with it yet. We are going to cover it back up, and we'll be back in another 15 to 30 minutes. Again, you don't have to set a timer. Just wander back and work on it when at least 15 minutes has passed. All right, we're back for stretch and fold number 3. This doesn't go on forever, I promise. It's just important that we do this a few times. So again, it's just stretching and folding. It's not a big deal. And you can take a minute to use the wetter parts of your dough to kind of scrape down, but don't squish that dough too much, okay? So we're turning it this way. See, it really does start to look like dough, okay? Really does come together. I know at the beginning it doesn't look like it's going to, but it does. So at this point, I'm actually going to turn this over, okay, so that our last bit of stretch and fold is is on the other side. So we are going to come back in 15 minutes or a little bit longer. You don't have to set a timer. And we will do our last bit of stretch and fold. I promise the stretching and folding is almost over. Then we'll get to the waiting. All right, the dogs are walking around now, which is fun. But we are doing our final stretch and fold. Yes, I promise this is the last one. Okay, so again, just your stretch and folds. Now you'll notice the dough doesn't tear like it did. It is much more cohesive, more like a dough. It is ready to be worked after we wait a little while longer. So our 4 stretch and folds. There we go. You see, it's still very sticky. If you tried to knead this, it'd be all over your hands. So, final stretch and fold. Pop the lid back on. Now we're going to walk away for about half an hour, but at least 15 minutes. Walk away, let it rest, and then I promise we'll take it out of the bowl. All right, so we don't have to do any more stretching and folding. See, it actually looks really good. That's how it should look. It should have some kind of wiggle to it. It should have high hydration, and high hydrations wiggle when you shake the container. So place that aside just for a second, and you're going to need something to bake it in. I'm using a 9x13 cake pan, and I'm using something with a lid because it's going to take a while to rise and we want to trap the moisture in. So it's a good idea to use something with a lid, or at least something you can put something on top of so that it doesn't all escape that moisture. All right, next up, we have to prepare this pan because if we just put the dough right in, what's going to happen is it's just going to stick. So we are going to use some olive oil, probably about a tablespoon and a half, depending on exactly the size of your pan. Drizzle some in the bottom, and then we're just going to take a basting brush, and we're just going to use that basting brush to get that oil all the way up the sides. Okay, we want that oil all the way up the sides, just so that our bread doesn't end up sticking. So make sure your pan is well oiled. Okay, that's what we want. Well oiled. Get that oil way up into the corners so your dough does not stick. Don't get rid of that basting brush. We're going to need it later. So now we're going to take our dough, and you are going to remove it from the pan and kind of let it stretch out. You're not going to roll it out because it'll stick, but kind of just let it stretch. So just kind of manipulate that dough, You're not going to be able to get it stretched out to the size of that pan right now. So you're just going to start manipulating the size of that dough just until you start seeing tears, then change where you're holding from. Because we don't want to actually rip our dough. So if it starts to actually tear, move your hands to where it's not going to tear right through, so you're not dealing with paper. So when you've stretched it a little bit, place it in the pan. We don't need that bowl anymore. And then you're just going to use your fingers. Don't use your whole hand or it's going to stick. But use your fingers and just start pressing that into the pan. You're not going to be able to get it all the way pressed into the pan right now because the dough needs to relax some more. But at least get it started. Kind of get that dough moving in the right direction so it knows to spread. Because if you don't do this, it'll rise up more instead of out. Okay, now what we're going to do is pop our lid on. Okay, and we are going to wait another 15 minutes. This is not its final rise cycle. This is just us waiting for the dough to relax enough to work with a little more. So we'll come back in about 15 to 30 minutes when that dough's relaxed a little bit more. All right, so our dough has relaxed a little bit more. You'll notice there is condensation happening inside the pan. That's good. That means that moisture is being kept in. So I'm just going to take the lid off. Okay? And I am going to use my fingers again to spread it a little more. Okay, so you want to spread it as far as you can spread it. And then we are going to set this aside for its final rise. Okay, sounds like we've been rising forever, but it's only actually been like an hour and a half. So we have to do a final rise. Remember, don't destroy every single bubble you see. Kind of be gentle because you don't want to kill all those bubbles. That's why we're using just our fingers and not our hands. So push that into the corners as far as you possibly can using your fingers, but it will rise. So now we're going to pop this lid back on and we're going to set this aside to rise for at least an hour, probably closer to 2, depending on the heat and humidity in your home. So cover that up, set it aside, let it rise. While you're waiting for it to rise, we can prep some of our toppings. So we're doing 4 different toppings on this one: sun-dried tomato, garlic, rosemary, and salt. I only need to prep the garlic and the sun-dried tomatoes. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to chop them, and you're going to chop them to whatever size you want. So because of who I'm feeding, I do not want huge, giant chunks. So I am going to kind of sort of dice. I'm not going to do it all on camera, but you can leave them big chunks like this if you want. You can decide you want little chunks like that. You can decide you want a variety of sizes. That's fine. And you're going to want 3 to 4 cloves of garlic for your bread. Chop it as large or small as you want. Remember, the smaller you chop, the more intense the garlic flavor. For the sun-dried tomatoes, same deal. Decide if you want to leave them whole. I'm not going to leave them whole. I'm going to chop them fairly small. I like kind of a uniform flavor when I'm doing these, so I like to have my toppings really evenly distributed instead of just taking chunks and moving and setting them on the bread. So I'm going to cut these up fairly small. So I'll show you when we come back, but I'm probably going to do about that size. So about a small dice is what I'm going to end up with. So I'm going to do that mostly off camera. How many sun-dried tomatoes do you need? Depends on the size. So you might need up to a dozen pieces of sun-dried tomato. I made these myself in last week's video. I will link to that video if you want to make your own sun-dried tomato. However, you can just buy them. It's fine. But sun-dried tomatoes are kind of the key ingredient in this particular recipe. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time chopping. We're going to wait for that dough to rise, and then we will come back and prepare our dough to be baked. All right, our dough has finished rising. We're going to remove the lid. We don't need the lid anymore. We are not going to bake it with a lid on. When it's done rising, it should look quite puffy. And also when you give the pan a shake, it should jiggle a little bit. Okay, that's important. So now we have to do our toppings. First, we need a little bit of olive oil. So we're going to do just a drizzle. You probably only need about 2 teaspoons or so of olive oil. You don't need a ton. grab our basting brush that we used earlier and just move that oil around on the top of your bread. Okay, just kind of get it evenly distributed. It doesn't have to be perfect. The nice thing about focaccia is it never has to be perfect. Okay, focaccia is kind of a throw together loaf, and it can do whatever you want it to do. It doesn't matter. Now we need our toppings. So I have my garlic here that I chopped pretty small, and we're just going to sprinkle that rather evenly around. So again, you can have more or less garlic. If you don't love garlic, you can reduce the amount of garlic. If you adore garlic, you can add more. So we're just going to do some garlic like that. Now we're going to get our sun-dried tomatoes, and like I said, I actually went pretty small. So you can see I chopped mine fairly small. And you can chop yours bigger. You can add more sun-dried tomatoes than I am. That's fine. But I'm not adding a ton, mostly because I don't need to. And not everybody who's eating this adores sun-dried tomatoes, so you kind of split the difference, right? So you can add lots, but you certainly do not have to. So there we go. I don't love huge chunks of tomato anyway, so it's fine, don't worry about it. There, that looks about good. Now we're going to want some rosemary. How much? I like to do like a tablespoon in my hand and then just get that on there. Rosemary is kind of important in this. If you hate rosemary, substitute out for oregano would be good. But rosemary is ideal. Now we're going to take some coarse salt and get that on there. Okay, you don't need a ton, but like a teaspoon is good. Nice and evenly distributed. There we go. Now the next thing you're going to do right before it goes in the oven is you're going to take your fingers and push your fingers into that dough. So you're not going to go all the way in the bottom. You don't want to tear through that dough, but you want to go pretty deep. So we're going to just take our fingers and then just kind of, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be like boop, 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 boop. You can just press the ingredients down into the dough, okay? So just put your fingers on those ingredients and just push them down. You don't have to be super, oh, like this, like this, like this. You just push it down. It's not a big deal. Push those ingredients down into the dough. Okay, so you have a few really nice indents around the dough. But don't squish the dough. You don't want to, because then you'll collapse your dough, and you don't want to do that. That's about good. So I'm going to preheat my oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, that sounds high, but focaccia cooks really well at a high temperature. And we are going to let it cook for 25 to 30 minutes. Check it at 25 minutes. You want to make sure it's not burning. That's one of the reasons I like a glass bottom pan. I can see how dark it's getting. It should be cooked after about 20 minutes. So if you find it's getting too dark for your taste, you can take it out anytime after 20 minutes. I like to leave it as close to 30 as possible. We'll come back when it's fully baked. And there you have it, our sun-dried tomato focaccia bread. If you're worried while it's in the oven that your tomatoes are going to burn, now these are not burned. These are definitely not burned. They do blacken and shrivel a bit. But if you're actually worried about burning because you want to leave it in the oven longer, put a piece of tin foil over the top once it starts to brown so that these don't get as dark. But I like them dark, so I left it. But that is what it looks like. It tastes delicious. It's really easy. Yes, it took a lot of time and we kept having to come back to do the stretch and folds, but it isn't actually difficult to make. You can do this easily in the morning, and if you do want to make it and then bake it the next day, once it is sitting rising, doing its 1 to 2 hour rise, instead of doing 1 to 2 hours, shove it in the fridge, let it do 12 hours rise in the fridge. It'll turn out just as delicious. The next morning, take it out, let it come to room temperature, and just keep going. This is a really easy, versatile recipe, so you can easily put it in the fridge and bake it the next day. But that is about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. I hope you enjoyed making the sun-dried tomato focaccia bread with us. We'll see you tomorrow.